count's up over 90 now.
All right, it's 6 o'clock. I'll call this meeting to order. Ray, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, our first order of business, as always, is to approve minutes from previous meetings. First, we have the May 9, 2011 work session minutes.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
It's been moved by Dick, seconded by Mike. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Those minutes are approved. Next, we have the May 9, 2011 regular Select Board meeting minutes, to which Ray and Dick made some minor administrative corrections during the work session.
I'll move that those be approved as we have amended.
Second.
It's been moved by Ray, seconded by Mike. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Those minutes are approved. And then we have the May 9, 2011 non-public meeting minutes.
I'll move that these be approved as presented.
Second.
Been moved by Ray, seconded by Mike. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Those minutes are approved. The Select Board will meet on the following dates. Regular meetings at 6 p.m. on Monday, June 13, 2011, and Monday, June 27, 2011. Work review sessions prior to the regular meetings will start at 5 p.m. There will be a public hearing on the adoption of the Hazard Mitigation Plan during the regular Select Board meeting on June 13, 2011. The hearing will begin at 6:30 p.m. All of the above meetings will be held in the Town Hall unless otherwise posted. Please note that the town offices will be closed on Monday, May 30th, 2011, in observance of Memorial Day. The Plymouth Memorial Day Parade will also be held on Monday, May 30th, beginning at 10:30 a.m., with the lineup for that parade starting at 10 a.m. at the National Guard Armory. Weather observations for the month of April are available in the Town Hall. And since our public hearing doesn't start for another half hour, we will go on with the agenda. Under Chairman's comments, we do have an invitation for selectmen to speak at the Plymouth State University orientation, which takes place on June 5, 12, 15, and 19. And we have identified one of each of us to go on those dates. And this is really an opportunity for the selectmen to provide a community welcome to the students who are returning in the fall, or who will be returning in the fall, and let them know that we are part of this town too. And it's a fun event. So we do have those names. We'll get on to committee reports. Ray?
Several things. First, I did attend the regular monthly meeting of the Plymouth Regional Chamber of Commerce Board this past Friday. It was mostly an administrative session in which they were reviewing business activities for the upcoming year, and also taking a look back at last year's activities, and including a very favorable review of the performance of their executive director, Scott Stevens. I was not present at last month's annual meeting that took place, and fortunately Val was there. The event did get great coverage in the Record Enterprise, and there was comments that were received back from the keynote speaker that he was very impressed with the work that the Chamber has accomplished in the past year, not only the scope of their activities, but the quality of the services that they've been providing to a much larger community scope now. So that went very well. I don't know if you want to add any additional comments on the annual meeting.
Annual meeting was hugely attended. It was standing room only, and a good expanded chamber.
One of the activities that my partner here, who's absent this evening, Charlie Berman, and I are assigned to is working on coming together for discussions with the union on a new contract proposal to move forward, knowing that we just recently completed a one-year extension of the present contract with some minor modifications. With that in mind, both Charlie and I took advantage of an opportunity to attend, and you do have in your handouts from, I think it was actually in the folder for the work session, gave you the front and the back page just so you could see the agenda. That was part of the one-day session that Charlie and I attended this past Tuesday. They really had to squeeze things to get them in, because under that first item of legislative developments, you'll notice that, excuse me, I'm sure you're quite aware of all the activities that have been occurring this year that have implications on employees at both the state and the town level. So probably a good first 2 to 3 hours of that day was taken to cover those things, with trying to gain an understanding of what they meant to the selectmen in their negotiation efforts should they have a contract coming up this year. It was well attended. There was a full room. I would say there was 50 people that were attending there. It was interesting for me to learn that Divine Millimat is the principal law firm that the local government center relies on, if I can use that phrase, to help them with their employment and labor relations activities. The presenters did a very good job of not only presenting the information, but as you might anticipate, there was a great deal of questions that were being posed, and did a good job of answering those. I am aware that Val did attend this similar session last year. I would point out that later on, when we go into non-public, there are some additional matters that I'll want to discuss with the rest of the board that were takeaways from that session as they relate to our efforts and our discussions with the union for this year. The other thing that's been occurring over the past several weeks is the first 2 sessions of the Select Persons Institute. It's a 4-session program that takes place in the late spring and early fall, and I inquired as to why there's a 3-month break, because there's no sessions between June, July, and August, and learned that experience has taught them that if they do try to do it during the summer, they do not get the attendance levels that they'd like to see in that session. There are 35 towns that are actually involved in this year's session, and I'll leave this information from the first 2 sessions downstairs, so at your leisure, as you come in to check your mail slots, if you want to scan through it, you can. As we've already learned earlier from Paul, they have published the latest edition of Knowing the Territory, which is a great reference tool for us to use as we try to drill through the various laws and statutes that we have to try to comply with. I have personally found the session to be very helpful. One of the more useful pieces of that is the give and take that takes place. The 2 sessions that I've been to so far, and classes start at 8:30 and they end, so far they've been ending about 4:30 on a Saturday, but the sessions have always included real examples of scenarios of problems that towns in New Hampshire have had to deal with and select persons have had to examine. And it's really great the way that we divide up into groups, and for us to have an opportunity to think through first how we might propose to address the issues, and then to see how it plays out with people from other towns responding to it, and then receiving the guidance from either the legal or professional staff, it's been very helpful. I know that Val previously has also been through this, and I highly encourage anybody who hasn't to take the time. It does require 4 Saturdays and quite a commitment, but I have found it very interesting so far. But I'll leave this information downstairs for a week or so.
Thank you, Ray. Mike, anything?
Well, I'll be at the water and sewer meeting tomorrow night, but there hasn't been one since we were here last.
Dick?
I was at the Conservation Commission meeting last Thursday, their last one of sort of this season. A fair amount of the discussion centered on the trail work that was done a couple of Saturdays ago, and they had a good contingent of PSU students who were a great help in carrying a lot of the wood and doing a lot of the heavy grunt work. But they got some good work done on some of the boardwalks and bridges. And I think, as mentioned in the minutes from last meeting, there'll be the site walk with Steve Walker, looking at the conservation easements, coming up in early June, and just some general discussion about what's on tap for next season.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And I don't actually have a committee report, but just wanted to mention the Plymouth Better Buildings Block Party, which is going to take place on June 4th at 10 a.m. And one of the things happening there is a drawing for a home energy improvement project, which I believe is valued at close to $5,000, if I'm not mistaken. It's, I think, $4,999. And they asked if I would draw the winning name for that, so I will be on the common at 2 o'clock to draw the winning name for the lucky owner of the home energy improvement project.
Do you know what time it starts and where?
It's right on the common. It starts at 10. I think it goes till 4.
Okay, thank you.
10 to 3, I'm sorry. 10 to 3.
And I can speak on behalf of Charlie.
Mm-hmm.
Charles Barron and myself. Charlie's been appointed by the board to represent negotiations and begin negotiating with Time Warner. We met last week, and it's been quite a costly process already with attorney fees, as the board knows. So we were able to bring on 6 towns and possibly the university that are going to take this on together as a group collectively. There'll be public hearings in the future so that the public can voice their opinions on the things that need to be corrected. And then that way there we can split the coverage of the attorneys and cut the costs down. We have experience on that committee from Holderness. The town manager there has done this before with 7 other towns. And it just cuts the expense of the attorney fees down significantly. So we'll be going forward with that. We really haven't been getting anywhere with Time Warner.
Right.
The good thing is the other towns have to get done by 2012. I believe PSU has 6 more months. We've got till 2013. But they will allow us to have one attorney come forward at the same time and probably get everybody closer to be on the same timetable.
That's good. And working with the other towns also gives us an advantage as far as negotiating with Time Warner, is my understanding.
Well, we weren't getting anywhere negotiating with ourselves. We couldn't even get a meeting together. And then when PSU came on board, then we got their attention, and then managers from other towns started to realize that if we did this collectively, because many of the towns are expiring at the same time, that there was strength in numbers.
What are the other towns? Can you,
I don't think that we should mention them yet until some of the boards are going back and
Oh, I
probably
see.
announcing it tonight.
Okay.
This starts surrounding towns,
mm-hmm.
where our trunk line connects to the surrounding towns. So. And we invite any other towns out there that would like to come on board.
Okay.
Madam Chairman, I don't know exactly where it fits, but perhaps under continuing activities under committee reports. Just to point out that this evening at 11 o'clock, WMUR Channel 9 is going to air a report on into the issues that have been raised on the proposed Northern Pass project. So everybody's aware that there is an opportunity to see what Channel 9 has to say about that matter.
There is also a movie being shown at the Flying Monkey this Wednesday concerning the Hydro-Quebec company. The proceeds from the movie will go to the Northern Pass Opposition Group. I believe the title of the movie is Down the Mighty River, but it's at 6:30 on Wednesday. And it's another opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on to other business. First, we have a discussion of LGC reserve and possible reimbursement with Mike.
Well, I asked Paul if he would put this on the agenda just because I know there's some controversy about it, and I thought it was something we might want to think about discussing at least. Probably everybody knows that, I don't know all the details, but there was legislation last term probably to empower the Secretary of State to sort of look into what LGC is doing and how they're doing it. In particular, I believe the issue was in relation to the size of the reserve that LGC has put aside. And the Secretary of State's office, I know, started their investigation, came out with a preliminary report in December of last year, and there is a final report that's pending, and I would normally wait, I suppose, until that came out and see what it said, but last week, the attorney at the Secretary of State's office that was doing the report released this press release in which he was very critical of LGC and the way that it was negotiating with him, is what I gather. And shortly thereafter, there was another press release from LGC, which was forwarded to all of us by Paul, I think, essentially defending itself and taking Mr. Wingate, the Secretary of State's attorney, to task for his press release. And then I found this is an editorial or an article from Seacoast Online. I'm not sure exactly who that is, if that's a newspaper or some other news service, but they were very critical of LGC in this thing and are reporting that Portsmouth has asked that its share of the funds that the Secretary of State's State Office claims has been improperly reserved or otherwise expended be returned to it. So Portsmouth, at least, has asked that $282,000 be returned to it. And then the Nashua Telegraph at the same time had an editorial that was very critical of LGC. And I'm just thinking that, I think the thought is that LGC may have more in reserve than it ought to have. That at least is what the Secretary of State seems to be saying, and I'm wondering whether we want to get involved in some form. I don't know exactly how much we do with LGC, but we have our health insurance through them,
I
right?
do.
And all our liabilities are through LGC.
Insurance.
Because the dollar amount coming back to Plymouth could actually be larger than Portsmouth because of the amount of things that we use LGC for.
I think the primary issue, the way I understood it, was the health insurance reserve account was some maybe $100 million more than
And that's what
some people thought
it
it
should have been around 60, and they retained 100,000, 100 million. Should have been 60 million.
So they kept 40 million over and above what
Over and
was
above.
considered a reasonable reserve.
Which we all thought, when we heard the Attorney General come, the Attorney General's office come to their conclusion that that was going to get disseminated back through to the individual towns. And that has never come to be.
Now, on this, just to clarify a little bit, the Portsmouth quote here is that Portsmouth asked the LGC to return $282,000 that was taken from the health insurance fund and put into the workers' comp fund, which is another,
And that's right,
Different
that's another whole
controversy.
situation. There's two different situations here. One is the possible misuse of money and funds, and the other is just the retainage of too much money. And if you're retaining too much money, then you're charging us too much money the next year. And that's what that equates to.
Right.
And I don't know if we really thought to ever expect any monetary refunds, but we at least thought we'd be seeing reductions in our insurance costs
And instead, we've
several
seen an
years.
increase.
in lieu of, yeah.
When is this final report going to be coming out?
I don't know. I think it's pretty imminent.
Yeah,
They haven't picked a date, but it's supposed to be soon.
I mean, I guess it sort of sounds like it's a little bit of a dueling press release
Yeah.
battle right now, which I always kind of, I would hate to weigh in on that, without having the, I mean, I think the report is going to be important, and, maybe the press release that was issued by the AG's office was.
It's Secretary of
or
State.
excuse me, Secretary of State's office. I'm not sure why he issued it, but obviously he felt, some need to, but, if it's sort of this, he said, she said kind of a thing right now. I mean, I'd be interested in seeing what the report
Seeing
says
the
before
final
I
report and making a
kind of
decision about what we
weigh in too much.
should
The
do.
reason I thought it was worth bringing up now is because I think that the LGC has been fighting this really, really hard. And they, there was clearly some bad blood here that instigated Mr. Wingate to release this. He apparently felt they were negotiating with him in bad faith. And so, and I think what had happened is that the LGC had gone into the legislature and tried to introduce a bill that would take away Wingate's power to do this, or the Secretary of State's authority to complete their investigation. And so I was thinking it might be worth weighing in some fashion just to let the LGC know that we were paying attention, we were concerned about it, I guess. Aside from that, I would tend to agree with you that it would make sense to wait for the final report, but I'd hate to see the LGC successfully push through some legislation that would short-circuit the whole thing.
Do we know what the status of that
No,
legislation is?
I don't.
I mean, that would be something also to find out, and,
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Madam Chair.
yes.
This past Saturday session, this matter did come up. As you might anticipate, one of the major issues that all of the towns spoke to when we did a survey at the first session of essentially what's on your mind as select persons these days, the subject of dealing with budget issues was very much at the top of everybody's mind. With that thought out there, the discussion ensued this past Saturday, in which there was the questions just being posed because we had the opportunity with some of the people from the local government center actually being there for their, if you will, take on it. And this includes the lady, and I forget her name, she's the actual, I characterize her as director of that. And it's pretty much as you have characterized it. There is, I mean, you kind of reinforced it also, Dick. It's almost like there's dueling banjos going on in the political arena right now. And we don't have the substance of a final report in which we see the particular legal arguments that the Attorney General may put forth that either reinforces or weakens the stance that LGC has taken on. They make a good case for themselves as to why they have designed this pool the way they've done it. They cite several other examples in the state in which the numbers are the same in terms of percentages and the allocations. But without that final report, I don't know exactly what the issue is that we would speak to. All the towns, of course, that were weighing in on this discussion that took place Saturday have the same interest. Is there any opportunity to get any funds coming back to the town that could help with some of our budget issues? But until we see that final report and have a chance to digest what that says, including our town attorney, I'm of the mind we ought to pay attention to it.
I think we should pay attention to it. I don't think it could hurt to contact our legislators and ask them to please not strip the Secretary of State's office of the authority to investigate this thing.
I would agree.
Because I think that's important. I mean, what we're talking about, I mean, it's not just the town and budgeting. I mean, essentially, LGC is holding tax dollars that could come back to the town and be very helpful to us as far as the tax rate setting. So,
Well, I would make a motion, I guess, that we, in some form, contact our legislators and try to make it clear that we would like to have them not support any effort to strip the Secretary of State of its authority to investigate.
I would second that.
it has been moved by Mike, seconded by Ray, that we contact our legislators, which would be Suzanne Smith and Mary Cooney. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. That's taken care of. Next on the agenda, discuss RFQ Rfp, and we are actually a couple of minutes away from 6:30 in our public hearing, and this discussion might take a little bit longer. Do we have time to go into the Groton Wind Farm discussion, Paul?
I think it should be rather quick.
Okay.
Just, if the board has anything else that they want to do, it's starting to get costly to continue this. And the fact that Groton and Rumney are the only ones that have a footprint for these, for the wind farm, we've basically been taken out of the picture. So
Could you say that again?
we could appeal. The wind farms aren't going to be on the property of Plymouth at all. So throughout the system, that's taken about 8 months through the process. The only dog we had in the fight was whether we were going to be the ones that would have to put out a fire and handle any other emergency on top of that ridge. And it's been the feeling of the Department of Energy and the company, and they won, that Plymouth will not be impacted by any fires up on that ridge. And that Rumney would be handling that. We don't feel that's the situation. Rumney backs up Groton. Groton's fire department doesn't have a fire truck. We know 30 seconds after Rumney gets toned off, we have to respond, but we still didn't win the debate. So we could appeal for the sake of appealing, but there's no
Likelihood of it having any effect is minimal.
I mean, it doesn't seem like it'd be a good use of town funds at this point.
So, there is a decision. The decision is subject to I guess a motion for reconsideration or rehearing.
reconsideration.
And we made a few requests which centered on the possibility of them supplying us with some sort of firefighting equipment. I
Fire
think,
suppression.
right?
Yep.
And the, is it the Site Evaluation Committee
Yes.
Yes.
decided that we didn't, that the project didn't warrant requiring them to provide any of that type of equipment to us, I think, right?
And they're going to have on-site automatic, whether it's dry chemicals, some type of site suppression equipment that should one of these things catch on fire, it's supposed to automatically put itself out.
And so we would be filing a motion for reconsideration.
Reconsideration.
Requesting that they really just reconsider those elements that we proposed in the first place.
Our argument
not
that,
the whole- not the
should
whole
one of those
project.
get hit by lightning and that suppression unit doesn't go off, and that forest catches on fire up there, Plymouth is a full-time fire department. We
I
know
guess-
we'll be putting out that fire.
What I'm saying is, we were not asking that the entire project not be permitted based on economic or environmental or any
Well,
other.
we went through, no, we also did the conservation.
Conservation, we also
easements,
had some requests about moving the locations of the turbines so they wouldn't have as much of a visual impact on Plymouth.
We feel there's going to be a tax impact, the view tax, even though per se we really don't have one. We feel that some assessments of property will go down and people will ask for abatements.
So if we did file this motion, would we be asking that those things be reconsidered too? The siting of the particular turbines, whatever else we had asked for before, would it be all inclusive, or would it be limited to?
Right,
I
but
suppose
that-
that's up to us, really, but
It's up to you, but I have disseminated through the board all the legal documents that came from our attorney, to which he feels that the only case that we have left is the fire suppression, because the Department of Energy weighed in so heavily on all the others.
All the others, and all of the other interveners also raised some of the other issues that we had raised, and the SEC dismissed them as, in everybody's case. It wasn't just Plymouth that didn't get listened to in those areas. It was all of the towns and all of the interveners that raised those issues.
So the only one that separated us from the other two towns was this fire suppression, to which Rumley said that they'll handle. So once they said that, that took us off the table.
And do we have any idea what it would cost us to do this?
To appeal,
If we did, yeah,
$200 an hour,
Yeah.
times, who knows? how
I
many
can
hours.
tell, this month was $900, two $450 bills.
It'd probably be a few $1,000s anyway.
Yeah.
I'm of a similar mind as Dick, that unless we believe that we can clearly point out that the site evaluation committee erred in their judgment, or unless we can present new information that we can bring forward as it relates to the fire suppression issue, I don't think it would serve the town well at all to expend the effort to try to ask for a reconsideration. If we can't point to where we strongly believe and can make a case where there's an error in judgment or new information to bring to bear, while it's regrettable that the case that we did make for the fire suppression is not succeeded, I don't know that I think we'd be beating a dead horse.
You're right.
There's another element to this, which is that I think these motions are usually pretty routinely denied. So you've spent the money to do it, you pretty much know it's going to be denied, and all you're really doing is protecting your appellate rights to the state Supreme Court, which I don't think we'd probably want to do, because then we're into the, lots of money.
And I'd like to add, and I can't remember all of the emails from our attorney, but I believe one of them stated that our chief did review the suppression system that was being put in place and was satisfied with that system. So I don't know how much ground we have to stand on to begin with.
To some extent, we may have sort of waived this challenge by agreeing that what they've suggested is adequate, I guess, is what you're saying.
Right, the only thing that I would see this board would be hoping for is that Plymouth would be compensated in some way to just go away. And I don't know if that's the right thing to do, and to revisit something just for that, and just to be tossed a bone so that we would stop.
Yeah, I think.
And I don't think that's gonna happen. I think they've won so much of their case already.
And I agree with Ray that unless we've got something substantive that we could put forward, then we really are just throwing bad money, good money at bad.
Since I haven't really said what I think yet, I would make the motion that we not go ahead with this motion for reconsideration or appeal, or whatever we're calling it, and stop whatever we're doing on that, I guess.
I'd second that.
All right, it's been moved by Mike, seconded by Dick. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we will drop that. And now it is 6:30, and it is time for our public hearing on the proposed amendment to the disorderly noise ordinance. And Paul, do we have Chief Temporino here, or is this?
Chief?
I didn't see.
Evening.
Evening.
In the late first semester, we were having a lot of concerns about noisy parties in the community, and we didn't feel that our existing ordinance was addressing it as best as it could. And one of the deficiencies that we found in the ordinance is that it relies heavily on officer discretion. It reads in reasonability. I think what is reasonable for 25-year-old police officers sometimes is different from maybe a 50-year-old police officer or even a 50-year-old resident. So we decided to firm up what reasonable is and adding that into the ordinance. And basically, we put a time period on that, in that we deemed that things were automatically unreasonable if they occurred after 10 o'clock at night. Noise, that is, that was occurred after 10 o'clock at night, could be heard off of the premise by a third person, and that these would be automatically would receive citations. Since doing this, from the first of the year to today's date, we've issued about 60 citations for noises, whereas prior to this, during the same time period, we'd only issued about 20. So it's had an incredible impact on our enforcement initiative.
It's much easier if there's an objective standard, I think.
I think there is. I think when the ordinance was put in place a long time ago, I think the problem of noise was different than it is today. The average age of the police officers enforcing it may have been different as well too. But we're trying to be more assertive in our actions with this type of enforcement and painting a clearer picture as to what is or what is not reasonable. It makes it easier for us to enforce that. So those are the reasons for the change.
So can you, I just forgot, oh, it's Roman 6E is 1 and 2, I guess, are the
Yes.
the changes. Somebody was kind enough to circle this in orange for me.
Nothing else in the ordinance has changed. There are still exemptions for this. Certainly municipal works, emergency works, are all, construction, are all exempt from many of these things.
Yes.
To some degree, you're kind of, this change is somewhat instituting a policy that's already in place, and that policy is based on the timeframes already outlined in Roman numeral 3, D and E, to talk about that 10 to 6.
Yes. You're right, we're, excuse me, we're already doing this.
Yeah.
I think the importance of committing it to ordinance is that in the future, there'll be, I guess, a benchmark.
Yeah.
To guide the decision.
Well, and also if somebody challenges the charge, you have an ordinance to rely on, which you don't
Right.
really right now.
It's a lot easier to rely on policy than perception when enforcing these things.
And it's easier to get the evidence.
Yes, it
You've got
is.
a witness or
Yeah.
whatever.
Right, did you have anything?
No, I concur with the proposal.
Do we have any public comment or questions? Yes, Mr. Miller?
Yeah, I'm concerned about, having just glanced over the ordinance, though, on section 3, paragraph D and E, talks about unreasonable noise in connection with moving boxes, dumpster, having our dumpsters emptied. And the reason I'm concerned about the time schedule, Main Street has schedules to have their dumpsters done between 4 and 6 for safety, because once the town gets crowded, that big truck can't get around. And that's the normal scheduling function. It's a once-a-week event. And the other thing is, in that same time period, most all your food service people get their deliveries, like the milk and other associated loading and unloading of boxes and stuff, containers. So if we fall back onto that, what is the unreasonable? How do we value, what's the value of unreasonable? Because those actions aren't really unreasonable when it's a normal function of doing business or a normal function of living, that process takes place. And the fact that it's been thought out for the purposes of safety, that it be done at that time schedule. And now this leaves it an element of doubt as to whether or not the Main Street business community should reschedule, or that action is considered unreasonable, and what is the level of noise, so-called, that is represented by this action that would be considered unreasonable.
Well, the section that you're referring to has been unchanged since the inception of this ordinance, and we have never had the problem that you're discussing. The main focus of this ordinance was to address some of the abnormal noise and disruptions in residential neighborhoods. And these are areas of our community where people typically are in bed sleeping at 10 o'clock. They generally work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, have children, and these types of noises are disruptive to them.
Yeah.
I think what you're describing are more commercial types of events in the downtown area. Very few people live in those residential zones, and many who do accept the challenges of dumpsters being unloaded and are not bothered by it. And I have never recalled ever receiving a complaint from anyone living in the downtown area that they were bothered by dumpsters being unloaded. We have recently received some complaints from establishments where live music is played or amplified music is played, and that sometimes interferes with some of the apartments, and we deal with that on a case-by-case basis. But the scenario that you're describing, I have never, ever heard happen in the commercial zone.
I think that's kind of what's key here, too, is that the police respond to complaints about noise, and if there aren't complaints in the commercial zone for the kinds of noises you're talking about, then they won't be responding. They're not going down Main Street looking for noises to arrest people for. So. Patrice.
Madam Chairman, I'd just like to point out to Frank not to worry about that, because you're just looking at the definition of one section of the statute. Frank, and under the first section, such person creates a condition which is hazardous to such person or another in a public place by any action which serves no legitimate purpose. Under the definition of the statute, it wouldn't be considered, they're doing this for a commercial purpose, it's legitimate, it's in a commercial area, so they're not going to get in trouble under the statute. I'd just like to thank the chief for coming forward and updating the ordinance in response to what we had, a very rocky fall. And any help we can get is greatly appreciated. The one question I had is if we wanted to add something else on page 2, under section 6B in a public place, whether we would consider adding as a definition of public place, perhaps the off-campus housing areas, simply because if, for enforcement of the statute, then maybe we can wait and see and do it at another time if need be. But if anybody can argue successfully that we can't, our town ordinance can't control actions on private property, I think we have very much demonstrated in the off-campus areas that these areas are very truly public. The kids treat them as public. We don't even know where a party starts or ends. You know, in the off-campus housing areas, when they spill over, that's usually where we have all the problems. So that's the one suggestion I have, would be adding that term under public place, and that might be a helpful enforcement tool.
May I ask a question? Patrice, say it again. What would be the amendment or the change?
Under, you have the sections of the statutes on page 2, definitions of,
Yep.
under 6,
Mhm.
the public place.
Mhm.
See how it lists, the term includes but is not limited to public ways, sidewalks, schools, hospitals, government offices or facilities. I would just add off-campus housing areas, and the lobbies or hallways of apartment buildings. That's what I thought might help.
Just bear with me for a sec. So you have this language in your mind. Exactly what would it be?
I would just add off-campus housing.
Where?
Let's see, past, I think it says dormitories.
Okay.
So comma dormitories, off-campus housing, comma hotels and motels. And again, it's just, that's in our town, just because we have these areas that are kind of, the kids consider common areas. Other towns don't have that.
So I think so this would say, and the lobbies or hallways of apartment buildings, comma, off-campus housing. Is that, comma, dormitories, is that?
Sidewalks, schools, hospitals, government offices or facilities. I would put it after, I'm sorry, like after facilities, off-campus housing areas and the lobbies or hallways of apartment buildings. That way it's a separate entity, because we're not worried about their inner areas.
Okay.
We're worried about the spillage out onto the whole area.
Do you think that it might, if you're going to add anything, would it not be more inclusive to say residential neighborhoods? I say that only because it's not necessarily the college students who are causing the disorderly, the noise. It might be, you know, a home with something going on that has nothing to do with the students.
The experience of the town, I guess, would indicate, I mean, it could apply anywhere, but these are the areas that massive numbers of people tend to congregate. And you're right, it doesn't have to be students. They could be, I mean, kids come from all over to party here. And
Well,
we don't-
Val's suggestion would address your concern without being discriminatory, I suppose, in tone at least.
Well, I wouldn't call it
Wouldn't it?
discriminatory. I would
Well,
just say we're specifying areas that it occurs, it is known to occur.
Would you object to substituting Val's suggestion for yours? Though,
No, I wouldn't.
terms of
I'm just
the intended
wondering,
effect.
limited to public ways, sidewalks, schools. I mean, what are you going to put in there? Neighborhoods? Residential neighborhoods?
well, that's what Val suggested. I'm just,
Doesn't leave anything in.
Right, I mean,
Doesn't-
that's kind
doesn't
of like
mean anything.
all
It's the town.
the town.
It's
Right.
not-
The town.
Right. I mean, it's just my suggestion from the enforcement. I'm concerned that they're going to argue we can't control activity on private property.
Mhm.
And the point is, like, when we have to respond, we ask our officers to respond to these, you know, there's 300 kids milling around different properties, and there's all kinds of craziness going on, and we have no way of pinpointing where, you know, whose party are you at, because we really don't even know where, you know, what property they're supposed to be at. It's just one big kind of roving, event.
Help me to understand this. The amendments to the existing ordinance now clearly are intended to give the police department the authority so that if there is a spillover, if I can use that term, of noise from any type of establishment, whether it's in a commercial area, a residential area, a private home, or an apartment building, whatever, dormitory, once that noise level is detected in a public area, regardless of the source, there's a violation.
It's true.
And if that's the case, I'm trying to understand what's the additional problem that we're trying to address that the proposed ordinance that's now in front of us doesn't already empower the police department to act on. Regardless of whether the source is, once it hits a public way, then the police department is unable to do that.
Well, actually, it says here, you know, anything that can be heard in any area outside of the property boundary. That's pretty all-inclusive, I think. So if it's in a private place, it can be heard anywhere else.
In public.
In public.
Well, outside of the property boundary, even the neighbor's house.
Yeah.
And I think the chief explained that was the intention. We have a neighbor who is angry about the noise next door, such as yourself, perhaps. You know, you are protected by this in that you can hear this outside of the property boundary from which it's emanating.
Right, well, my suggestion is just simply to allow, if good attorney Mike would argue that we have no control in the town ordinance over behavior on private property. I just thought that adding as a definition of public place, just being more inclusive or specifying the off-campus area, since that isn't something unique to our town, that might be helpful. But it's you know, just my suggestion. If the chief doesn't think he needs that, and enforcement is able to go forward, that's fine.
May I ask the chief a question? Yes. Are these, when you have when you give somebody a violation on this ordinance, you issue a ticket like any other
Yes,
summons?
yes.
And is this payable? Is this the type of, this is a no court appearance type?
No,
Summons?
it's a must appear.
And
There is an arraignment, you must appear at arraignment.
And then, like anything else, you have the choice to plead guilty or not guilty at arraignment?
Yes.
And of these 60 or so that you've issued this year, have all of them been disposed of already?
Not yet.
Do you know how many of them have?
A significant amount of them plead guilty at arraignment, and usually they'll plead guilty because it's standard. Standard fine is $300. Usually $150 is waived, so they pay a $150 fine. A few of them have gone to trial. They've been found guilty, and they're fined usually $300 plus a penalty assessment.
Have you had any found not guilty after trial?
Not many, but we have had some.
If I may, were any of those that were found not guilty, was there any connection between the incident or the location of the incident and the citation? I mean, any problems there that were identified by the courts?
I don't know, but my intuition is that everything relies on what the court's understanding of reasonable is. It's really important for us when we present these cases in court that we have police officers who are there and can witness through their eyes and ears what the activity is. And one of the things I wanted to talk about, what Frank mentioned about box containers in the commercial zone, one of the things that's very important here is the underlying legitimacy of the behavior to begin with. You know, if your commercial business's part is unloading a dumpster at, say, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, well, that just seems like a very legitimate thing to do. Layering your stereo or having 150 people on your front lawn at 3 o'clock in the morning in a residential area, there's nothing legitimate about that. So having a police officer there to witness, well, someone did make a noise at 3 o'clock in the morning, but it was a mistake. They came home from work, they slammed the door to their car, the radio was on, and a neighbor was awoken, And when the police got there, they found out what that was. Well, that was a mistake, and that would never make muster in a criminal court. We can never prosecute somebody for that. And that's far different from putting the box speakers out the window at 11 o'clock at night and turning the noise up very high. So those are two different things. The underlying legitimacy is very important. And police officers have to testify to what they saw and what they heard and where they were.
Madam Chair, reflecting on the point that Patrice has raised here, I would suggest that we move forward once we close public hearing with our discussion on amending the ordinance with the recommendations that we've gotten from the chief. But have the chief come back in and give us a report at the end of this year, and in particular to be mindful of the point that Patrice has raised, to see if there are any instances that fell into that hole, so to speak. Then let us know what the outcome of that is, and also give us a report at the end of the year on the actual court decisions that take place. That way we kind of can move forward and still keep in the back of our minds the point that Patrice has raised, and see if there is some further improvements that we might need.
When you say the end of the year, you mean?
Sometime in January, February, tell us what the outcome was for 2011.
The calendar year.
Yes, sir.
Is that how you do, that's how you do your statistics? Calendar year?
The statistical report that you see in the annual report is based on a calendar year as far as the numbers. Although recently, I think in the last 2 or 3 years, we've changed that. I think what you're seeing in the town report is actually fiscal year. But for this purpose, I can do it either way, yeah.
I think that's reasonable. Is there any other public comment or questions? Yes, Tim.
Thank you, Chairperson. I have a couple of questions to clarify that, a couple of stories, which maybe are funny, maybe not. But first, I'm a little confused because I've heard a couple of different things. One, Val, I heard you say, if someone calls in a complaint. I haven't heard that from the chief. It seemed to me like this was trying to establish eliminating the discretion. And then the chief, I heard you talk about we have to use the officer's legitimacy of the complaint in the trial. But then I heard earlier, this would take the discretion away. If you can hear it, it is a violation and you will issue a summons. So I guess my first questions are, is it any time that an officer hears anything that then the summons is issued if it falls into the public place parameters, or is it only when a complaint is called in? And then how much discretion does the officer have in whether or not they make a judgment? When I hear they will determine whether it's legitimate or not, or whether it's a mistake or not, that implies that you're still allowing for officer judgment, which I think personally makes sense, that to simply say, if I could hear something, period, from a sidewalk, no matter what it is, I must issue a summons. So I guess I'm a little confused because I've heard what seems to be slightly conflicting anecdotal comments. They're not reflected here. This seems to be cut, dry, black, white. I hear it, it comes onto the public way, which is the sidewalk, you must issue a summons.
The short answer to all of your questions is yes.
Thank you for clarifying.
The public does call us for noise-related issues, and if they are after 10 o'clock, officers shall issue citations based on the criteria. But the underlying issue is the noise legitimate or not? There are times when we are called to investigate a disturbance and we find out that it was after 10 o'clock at night, the noise could be heard off the property on a public place, but there was some underlying legitimacy of it. A car door being slammed, something happening on the property, and there was nothing nefarious about the act. It was a mistake, it was easily mitigated, and the officer knows that under no circumstances will they be able to actually make a successful prosecution. And in those cases, people are basically told, hey, be careful, be quiet, and there's no enforcement action taken. On the cases where the police arrive, they witness noise that is clearly illegitimate and happening after 10 p.m. at night and can be heard off the premise, citations are generally always issued. there are times when the public hasn't called yet about a noise issue. The police see it, and they clearly can determine that the noise is illegitimate and that it is heard off the property. Oftentimes, citations are issued, but in those cases, the rules of the court dictate how difficult getting in that evidence is, because there are some court decisions that say that the average sensibilities of a police officer cannot be disturbed. So the disorderly conduct statute, which this ordinance is mirrored after, relies on the fact, or talks about things like the average sensibilities of the public. And police officers who are on duty are not really considered the public. They're a different case. So it relies on the public being disturbed. So I think in some cases where the public does not call and a citation is issued, those cases could be jeopardized in court if we go to trial. Generally speaking, by the time we get to that point, though, it's not that serious, not that significant of an issue. I hope it answered your question.
Well, I think it does, and maybe part of my concern is that in the opening remarks, students were mentioned as one of the targeted populations for this ordinance. And so I have some concern that they're not here. So maybe this discussion of what's legitimate, and maybe I can turn to Doug in a second, because I know that one of the things that happens in many apartments is you're not allowed to smoke in the apartment, so you need to come out onto the porch. And if we are talking like this, in 99% of the apartment houses in this town, you will hear that from the sidewalk. I tested that this morning, went down to the mailbox, and I talked about this loud, and my wife could hear me 100 feet away, which is way further than most of the so what is legitimate? And maybe you'd tell me that an officer would look at that and say, that's a legitimate noise, and we're not going to confront that if they're talking in this level and they're not laughing and being raucous, and that would be appropriate, because none of us want to see anybody disturbed from their sleep. One thought, I guess, as you deliberate this, because of the timing and the announcing of this, one of the largest populations that is going to be subject to this is not here to share their thoughts on what's legitimate, what's not, and to understand this. I would like them to buy into this so that it's not adversarial. So just one thought would be to perhaps consider waiting until the fall where we could muster some dialogue and have some of that population available. I was also thinking I was sitting in my hot tub singing softly to myself, so trust me, that would not have been heard off the property. But I could hear probably 10 houses down the road, a dog barking at 11 o'clock at night that went on and on and on. And I assume that is a violation if somebody can't control their animal, but I don't know. Maybe that's after warning, of course. I'm sure you'd warn them and you'd ask them, because that would seem legitimate to me, a dog barking. Maybe I didn't hear my dog, or maybe I've become desensitized. I need a reminder. So, but as we get into it, and this is, I'm sure, what you're trying to clarify, Chief, is that as soon as you start having discretion and you start deciding legitimate, well, somebody has to set a benchmark. What's legitimate? What is legitimate noise? And that's not going to be the same for every population. So the more we can establish those benchmarks, the better. I don't have an easy solution. I think our police do a very good job of knowing when something is not legitimate and when it's out of hand, and that they issue those kinds of things, those summonses wisely. I will share that the upsurge that the chief mentioned, we are seeing an increasing number of upset, angry students who feel they were targeted inappropriately. I am not defending their actions, don't misinterpret that at all. But that sentiment, we have seen it growing, and I certainly would prefer to see that everybody was on the same page. We buy into this, we understand it. Certainly the chief and I will work together to help educate people in those neighborhoods. Just some food for thought. It's not an easy decision, and it has ramifications that I don't want to see us regret later if we haven't been thoughtful in the deliberations. Thank you.
Just as a follow-up to that, you know, we do have remedies for barking dogs. We don't use this ordinance, but we do have a nuisance to abate, which we use a lot, especially during the summer months when dogs are out more. Getting back to having further discussions with this, perhaps during the fall, honestly, I think it's actually a very bad idea. I think that the standards, the values of this community the traditional resident of the community, sets the norms for what behaviors are, what noises are, what younger crowds of people have in their mind's eye as to what is legitimate behavior is far different from what traditional residential uses of neighborhoods ought to be. And I do not think it would be a good idea to entertain to entertain a large group of people that are living in areas of our community and causing disruption. This ordinance is not targeted at college students at all, but that population, that segment of our community clearly has the most problems with this ordinance. And that is true with all of our alcohol violations as well. That is also true with a significant number of our marijuana arrests as well. That is certainly true with the areas where we sustain vandalism in our community as well. That is what it is. And I don't think that having that group, that transient group, come into this community and weigh in on a policy that we as a community value will actually be beneficial for us in the long run.
I agree with you. I think the decision to live off campus comes along with a responsibility to meet the behavior standards of the community. And what this is doing is just giving you a tool, the clarification, so that there's a definition of what's unreasonable noise.
Reflecting on the matter that you had in front of us a little earlier, where we're welcoming the incoming freshmen in the next few weeks at the various sessions, and thinking about the proposal that we heard here from Tim, certainly creating that understanding and awareness early on with new college students as to those expectations. If once you do get to a point in your college career where you can live off campus, that there are requirements that you have to conform to if you want to live in this community based on the community expectations. The other comment that I would offer up is that what we have in front of us in terms of a matter tonight is amendments to the existing ordinance. And the major points that have been discussed here, including the points made by Tim, actually reflect on the ordinance as a whole. And again, that's something that we should be attentive to, but the matter in front of us tonight is the amendments. And I don't believe any of the discussion that we've heard so far causes me to believe that we shouldn't move forward with the amendments.
Kathy?
Kathy Bentley, speaking as a former resident at 4 Russell Street, by the time you've called the police, which is not comfortable at 2 a.m., you've already had a lot of fights with your husband about, why are we living on this street? This is crazy. So it's a little disturbing to hear that the police cannot use their discretion, because the damage has been done by the time somebody who loves this town has made that phone call.
Yes.
Thank you, Steve. I love that answer, because it's our town, and we've been enduring this noise forever, and this ordinance is very important, and I don't think we need their input. It's our town. Thank you for your answer, Steve.
Tim?
Yeah, I'm simply trying to avoid, it was introduced as targeting off-campus student behavior. So that was how the evening began. Anytime we polarize and become adversarial, you run the risk of increasing that adversarial and polarization. And I'm simply suggesting that when you impose will on really tax-paying citizens of the town, whether you believe they're transient or not, they are paying taxes, they are citizens, they're entitled to the full rights and responsibilities. They need to be fully held accountable for any violation, any disruption. So do not misunderstand. I am not defending that. But I'm just simply asking, I believe the amendment that we're speaking to, and I still am not 100% clear. The example I used is somebody talking conversationally on their porch, for example. is that then prima facie evidence to summon somebody, or is it not? So it's-
No,
okay.
no.
So we're still maintaining,
Yeah.
I think the
Because
discretion is absolutely critical.
There's some legitimacy to that behavior. In fact,
Thank you.
we routinely get involved with that very kind of nature. What often happens, though, there's 2 or 3 people having a cigarette at 1:15 in the morning, having a conversation. Well, the bars have just let out. People become flooding into the neighborhood, and that crowd goes from 2 or 3 to 10 or 15. And 10 or 15 people talking at that level all of a sudden becomes more of a problem.
Right.
So when the police are called, there's a judgment call that has to be made at that point. And the judgment call is, look, folks, we either go inside, we disperse, or a citation could take place. That's a hard place for us to be in sometimes, because there is a level of legitimacy in that behavior. The underlying concern here is that we have 2 groups with different value systems. And if you live in a residential neighborhood, whether it's in Plymouth or anywhere in this country, there are certain norms and values and expectations of living in a residential neighborhood. And that is that the people who live there go to work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. They have 2.5 children, and they have a kid. And at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, there shouldn't be extraordinary amounts of noise. And we do have that in our community.
Absolutely.
So this is another attempt to try to eliminate that, and that's all. Young people between the ages of, say, 18 and 25 tend to have different behavior patterns. They tend to sleep till midday and not go to bed until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. That's a fact. That behavior pattern probably isn't consistent with residential living, and there's our rub right there.
And as you know, that's a rub that we deal collaboratively on all the time, and I know we'll continue to do that. And I invite the select board members to stay for the whole evening program to see some of the other elements, both a whole PowerPoint interactive thing on citizenship, and then later a very powerful presentation on what alcohol can do in your life negatively, is that we present to our entering students. And I just wanted to make sure that we don't take away from our officers or put in place something that doesn't allow them to make those judgments on legitimacy, because I believe they do that very well, and they need to be able to do it proactively, not only reactively. And they also need to be able to decide where it's happening and when it's happening and what is that impact. Because as I think we heard the chief say, somebody emptying a dumpster behind Rand's Hardware at 5 in the morning is a legitimate, purposeful thing that actually protects the community because it does it at a time that's safe. Don't want to target that behavior, and so I'm glad we're maintaining that kind of judgment and legitimacy. Thank you.
I just, I don't, there is no effort here, I don't think, to make life difficult for anybody or to prevent people from socializing outside of their house. I think what the chief is talking about is situations that become really troublesome. I think if we looked at a statute that defined assault, I think it says unprivileged touching. So if I reach over and touch Val, I guess I could be charged with an assault. I don't think that Chief Temporino would probably charge me. He'd want to see me, you know, hit her pretty hard. Or he'd want to see, you know, I mean, there's gradations of all of these
Not
things.
going there.
But I don't think that the chief expects that any time a conversation can be heard on a sidewalk between 2 people that they're going to get arrested for a violation of the noise ordinance. I think he just wants an objective criteria by which these judgments can be backed up if he has to provide some evidence ultimately. And I think we felt that it was a little too subjective before. Is that?
That's a very good point. The law is not a black and white document. It's not science, it's art. If it was black and white, I don't think we'd need police officers or judges. That's why there's a level of interpretation But before this amendment to this article, we had a very wide-ranging understanding and appreciation for what is or what is not reasonable. And I think it's very reasonable to expect that after 10 p.m., everywhere in this community, that we should have a level of solitude in our homes.
I agree totally. I just caution us, this language does not have any terms about legitimacy or judgment or analysis of any kind, any noise. And I don't want to see the police department held by some other citizen who demands them to enforce this by the way it's written. And I guess that's my only concern. It is a very black and white. Any noise heard, bingo. So I'm glad to hear that we're not really doing that.
Well,
we're leaving
on that note, the police department doesn't have an obligation to enforce any law. We don't have to enforce any laws. We can interpret for ourselves what we choose to. Everyone here has gone through a stop sign. Everyone here has driven their cars too fast. So we have no obligation to enforce every single law. Again, that's why police officers are humans, because they can interpret what needs to be done and what should not need to be done.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm Veronica Barbadaro, I'm from Plymouth, and I have a question of how you came up with 10 o'clock, because that seems very early to me. You know, most people watch the 11 o'clock news, you know, so they're still awake. So I don't know where you came up with 10 o'clock, especially on a weekend, because that's a very early hour to ask for them not to be socializing and having a game of volleyball on their lawn and, you know, having a good time.
I don't think it's an early time of night for you to be disturbed by the neighbor next door. Now, keep in mind too that there has to be an underlying illegitimacy to this behavior. How we train some of our officers is by saying, if you are cutting your grass at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you can hear the lawnmower next door and down the street. But if you're cutting your grass at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, there's nothing legitimate about that behavior. It's the same with music and noise. So there are, 10 o'clock is mentioned in other places in the ordinance when it deals with machines and things like that. So 10 o'clock just seemed to be kind of a common sense time of day. And I also think that it fits in with what the majority of the community standards are about noise and disruption.
Can I ask the chief a question? You know, I thought I had read this, but I'm looking at both of these things again. In the third line of the amendment, it says Monday through Saturday until 6 a.m. and then it says Saturday to Sunday. I wonder if we just meant Sunday.
Could have been a typo.
Could we say 10 on Sunday? 10 a.m. on Sunday? Or did you mean to say Saturday on Sunday?
I think it would be, it should be Monday through Friday, grouped together for the 6 a.m. and then 10 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday makes more sense, just based on weekends.
Yeah, it doesn't make, this says 10 p.m. and 10 a.m. Right, is that what you're referring to?
I think you could
You've
almost
got
have a
Saturday
comma
twice.
after 10 p.m.
Yeah.
and 10 a.m. See, Saturday shows up at the 6 a.m. and then it shows up at the 10 a.m. I think.
Yeah.
Val is suggesting that it say Monday through Friday, well, before 6 a.m. Monday through Friday, and no, I'm confused. I thought I had this written purpose after 10 p.m. and before 6 a.m. Monday through Friday. And I think it should say, and before, I think maybe, what about this? Any noise is created in a private place that can be heard in a public place after 10 p.m. and before 6 a.m. Monday through Friday. And after, comma, and after 10 p.m. and before 10 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday.
Okay.
And the same on the other
It
one.
makes more sense.
If you look at 3D, talks about 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Monday through Saturday, and then it kind of breaks out the Saturday, Sunday. I think it breaks it out the same way you
I
were
see.
just describing.
Well, no, that's limited to Sunday, really. That's worded a different way. That, yeah, see, that one really is, it has the 10 p.m. through Saturday. I mean, 6 a.m. through Saturday, and then 10 a.m. only on Sunday.
It should be consistent.
I think it should say Saturday then. And we could,
So it should stay the way it was written.
no, because.
Saturday should be cut from the second section.
Monday through Saturday, and 10 p.m. and 10 a.m. on Sunday. You have a mess here. So, how about this? Any noise that is created in a private place that can be heard in a public place after 10 p.m. and before 6 a.m., Monday through Saturday, and after 10 p.m. Saturday evening is
It's Saturday and
before.
Sunday evening. Yes, it is. Because Sunday, then you don't have Sunday evening in it at all. I think he had it right in the first place.
I don't think we should use the term evening.
Okay.
Right. And I think the original language actually was correct, because you're talking about,
Maybe it's not as bad as that.
it isn't, it's,
Leave it.
Yep.
We'll leave it, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's only changing the Sunday morning.
right.
It's saying.
It's after 10 p.m. every night.
It's recognizing Sunday as requiring more quiet.
All right, I apologize for opening my mouth.
Accepted.
Huh?
Accepted. All right, is there any further discussion? Yes, Frank?
Just a question for my own information. If you respond to a building that has multiple people, say 20 people show up, who gets the ticket? All the people, the landowner, the property owner, or what happens if you show up, there's been a noise, and you continually show up at that address and the same issue, where, I know there was some discussion about giving the tickets to the landowner or the property owner, and after a certain time, they would realize it's too expensive, they would take remedial action. But I'm just curious as to how that evolves.
This ordinance focuses on the property, the tenant, or the person who lives at the address. It's not location specific, it's individual specific. So if the event is occurring in your dwelling or in your apartment, you are personally responsible for it. There are occasions where in some of the apartments, the event is going on in multiple apartments, and that's more difficult for us to get a handle on. Usually, a lot of these events like that, a property owner or a landlord usually ends up coming to the house as well, and sometimes can assist us in finding out where the lowest common denominator is. But there are occasions where these events become so disorganized and so large that it would be impossible to determine what individual is responsible for all this behavior, which, you know, is actually, that in itself is a problem in our community, where some events just become so out of control, there is no one really responsible for the entire thing. It's just a collective of everybody. But that's the best answer I can give you, Frank. But it's basically find who's responsible for, and if you can locate them, and you can cite them, and you can make a case, we will.
Yes.
Ashley Phillips. Going off of that, an apartment with multiple tenants, does each tenant then receive the noise ordinance? Is it only the first tenant that responds?
It would be if there are, say, in an apartment building, there's 4 units, A, B, C, and D. And if we go to A and only 1 or 2 of the tenants are there, it's only 1 or 2 that get the citation. The off-location tenants who are not there will not be cited.
Thank you.
There's no further discussion. Do we have a motion to approve this proposed amendment to the disorderly noise ordinance?
I will make it.
I'll second that.
All right, it has been moved by Mike, seconded by Ray. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The amendment passes. Yes.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank both Steve and his department for the last 9 days in the village. I know on paper it might not have seen a successful week with all the fires that we had, but to see what the department had to go through and what they've been able to retain it at and what it could have been, I think it's been an incredible 9 days for that department and what they've had to endure, and I think they did it successfully and without any really bodily harm done to any residents, and did a good job protecting the neighborhood. And the fire department responded to each fire very quickly, and we had one really close one right next to a resident, and I think their response time helped that from turning into something that could have been much worse. So I'd like to just pass my thank you on to the chief and his department.
I agree. Thank you.
Absolutely.
My pleasure.
Thank you for coming by.
Thank you very much.
That concludes the public hearing, and now we will move on to back to our regular agenda. The next item, which we had passed over earlier, is the discussion of the Rfq Rfp for the police and fire departments. Over 2 years ago, SDA and Bonnet, Page and Stone were selected to provide architectural and engineering services related to the design and construction administration of a new police department and fire department headquarters here in Plymouth. I believe that the proposals received at that time cannot still be considered current, and therefore would like to recommend that the board consider a request for proposals and a request for qualifications to meet the department's current needs. And we have a draft, and that's Rfq Rfp is the shorthand for it. We have a draft that has been prepared and has been reviewed. This was actually prepared last November. The decision was made to stay with SDA and Bonnet, Page and Stone subsequent to that. But I think that at this time, it would be appropriate to reconsider. And I would like to take a moment to just read the RFP, RFQ invitation portion of this, and a little bit further on. Town of Plymouth, RFQ Rfp for architectural and engineering services for a new police department headquarters and expansion/renovation or replacement of the existing fire department facility. The Town of Plymouth, New Hampshire, the town is requesting qualifications and proposals for an architectural and engineering services related to the design and construction administration of a new police department headquarters to be located alongside the existing facility, an expansion and renovation to or removal and rebuilding of the existing fire station facility on Highland Street. 6 copies of the qualifications package and fee proposal should be sent to the town in 2 separate envelopes, clearly marked request for qualifications and request for fee proposal on the exterior. Qualifications information will be reviewed first and fee proposals opened separately for those submissions deemed to be qualified based on previous project experience with the design of these types of facilities. And this will be published with due dates and all the details of the requirements. The objective here is to obtain a complete schematic design or pre-bond effort for both facilities, along with a corresponding estimate of the total project cost in time to present a warrant article to the voters, or possibly 2 warrant articles again, to the voters at the March 2012 town meeting. Any
Yeah, if I could
discussion?
offer several comments. First, as I reflect on the decision that you spoke to that the then Board of Selectmen made, that we believed it was in the town's best interest, both from the standpoint of scope of work and also financial considerations, to continue with the existing proposal that we already had in hand, knowing that there had been a competitive process not quite a year ago that had brought that organization to the forefront for agreement with the town on the then considerations that were in front of us. There are 3 of the 5 current members of the board that were part of that decision, Charlie being the 3rd one who's not here this evening. But as I also recognize that we've got 2 new select board members who were not part of any of the activities that either took place 2 years ago with the selection and identification of a suitable partner to move forward with on this. It seems to me that it makes sense for that reason for us to put this back on the street. The other matter that comes to my attention is to recognize that, as you use the word current, is that there has been 2 years. And if the existing contractor engineer that we have been working with is indeed the best one to continue to work with, my experience and personal belief is that'll shake out in another competitive process, and that would serve us as a board well to see that occur, and perhaps reassure the people in the town that we are indeed being very mindful of the way that we go about selecting the professionals that we choose to engage. So I think there's credibility that to be gained by putting this back out on the street. And I guess the 3rd thing is we are starting to hear that there is an uptick in especially here in New Hampshire with the economy. It's not good as we all would like it to be, but there is an uptick. And I still believe that we're ahead of the curve in taking advantage, if we can, of any expenses associated with the design and building of any either modifications or new facilities. And we still have time, since we're just sitting here in May. It's only been about 60 days since town meeting. So the timing is good to go ahead and do this and put it back out there. So I, for one, believe it's a prudent step and would support it.
Thank you. Dick?
I would support this also. I think it's a very good idea. As I said during my quote-unquote campaign, which was candidates night, and a couple times since then, I mean, I think one way that I look at this issue is that, you know, we've gone to town meeting twice and it's failed twice. So what's Plan B? And Plan B may be at the end of the of the entire discussion may be very similar to what we have right now, but, I mean, I think there's a need to maybe think outside the box a little bit. I'm not saying reinvent the wheel, but at least maybe pursue some other options or look at some other choices. In the draft that's on the table tonight, and I recognize this is the slightly marked up version from November 2010, just in the very first paragraph, it talks about the new police station to be located alongside the existing facility. I think that boxes us in too much. There is a little bit of a condition to that statement on page 2 in the background discussion that talks about, the town anticipates that the new police station will be built on the same and/or adjacent lot. So I think that gives us some flexibility, but again, I don't want to see us boxed in, and I think the same comment would also fall on the second discussion, or the second paragraph in the background discussion on page 2 concerning the fire station.
We really could just delete, however, the location language.
Yeah, that would be my preference. Again, just to give us, I think, the flexibility that at least I would like to bring to the table when we have some additional discussions on these matters.
I agree with that.
I can support the idea of the location. I know that we have a discussion or two that we still need to have as a board, but I go into it mindful of the past years of experience and reflecting on what did happen with the vote at the town meeting. And I am going into that discussion with an open mind to make sure that we do cover all of our bases. I also harbor a belief that we answered a lot of key questions about what needs to occur in this town, and I think the decisions that need to be made are focused more on how we go about doing that.
And for me, I agree that I think probably, from what I've heard around town, I believe that it's probably best that we put it back out again, because I think there are people that feel that that needs to be done for different reasons, but that it needs to be done. I think it would probably be a good idea. I think yeah.
Oh, go ahead, finish.
I'm finished.
Okay. No, I've spent the last few days, going through proposals that we've seen and worked with in the past. Some predated my tenure on the select board, but that's why I chose the word current, because I think we really do need to see what's out there now and see what we can get.
Yeah, and I would also agree that we ought not to lock ourselves into either location at this point, and really kind of take a fresh look at it.
All right.
I'd like to see us, give it the best possible chance, because I think it's important that we do something for both of these departments as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. And
we want the town to be behind it 100%. Well, 66 and 2/3%.
67%. Let's go for 67.
Rather precise number.
And since we do have some representatives here from the citizens group that has volunteered to assist the board with this, do any of you have any comments on this?
Naturally. I do. Mary Crowley. Surprise, right. I'm encouraged that the concept of opening up a bid process for the architectural and building components of any proposals that make it to town meeting. I mean, I'm glad, I think that's a step in the right direction. But have you all discussed as a board at all the nature of the introduction to our group that I made, I don't know, a few weeks ago? Have you talked about that at all?
We haven't had one.
Okay, that's all right. I'm just trying to figure out where we stand on
We
things.
had one meeting since then, and it was not one of our issues.
Because just to not to rehash ad nauseum or anything, but one of the points I tried to make that night, and perhaps I didn't make it clearly enough, is that I very easily was able to get 20 really intelligent members of our community to spend 2.5 or 3 hours talking about an interest in forming a broad-based, community-based approach to the solution of the infrastructure needs of our police and fire departments. So what I'd like to say is, I think the RFP, RFQ is a great thing to do. It is predicated on a construction management model. One of the huge dissenting voices at town meeting had to do with the fact that a construction management model versus a design build model was moving forward. I'm a wife, a sometimes writer, an ex-printer. What I know about building, you can fit in a thimble. But I don't think that any of these solutions are going to pass to 67% of the vote unless we take a community-based, broad-based, fresh look at the whole thing. And the only question anyone asked me that night was, Dick, you asked me, has your group talked about what they're interested in working on? And I answered you very honestly, and I said, everything. From needs assessment to really clear understanding of operational needs of the departments that articulate into coherent building design. So I guess what I would like to ask is that you set aside this RFP, RFQ issue for the time being, fully applauding that you're throwing it back out, that whatever comes out throws back out to bid. But I would like to ask if I could, I don't know if I do that as a motion or whatever, but I'd like to give you a list of 20 names, and I'd like the select board to choose from among those 20 names 10 committee members to craft proposals that'll go to town meeting and to help in the RFP, RFQ. In other words, to do the work that the committee was charged with last year that did not end up being completely finished. For a variety of reasons, for all the right reasons, the wrong things have been done for the last 2 years because it hasn't been successful. I'm really invested in it being successful. And when I look around our community, the things I see that this town has been willing to pay for are things that were built from the ground up by a much broader group of people, not things that came directly out of town hall. So I guess that's my request. Can I give you 20 names? Will you give 10 people a chance to look at construction management versus design build? Look at the operational needs of the departments, because those are still, last year's work was based on assumptions from 2 years prior. All of that needs to be done in order to articulate and do a good public relations effort on behalf of the proposals when it's time to do them. If you can't articulate why better service delivery is going to happen as a result of these projects, it's never going to happen. And I don't, so, I mean, you got a group of very smart people who want to help, and I think I would like you to let that happen. That's what I have to say.
I would ask.
Enough?
No, I would, and this is something that we can think about. I would ask that in addition to the list of names, that you also give us the list of the specific tasks that you think that this committee should be empowered with performing Because what we did run into last year, and I think everybody's aware of it, is that we spent so much time on locations that we never got around to
Correct.
more specific, you know, the bigger picture. And, you know, I don't think anybody needs to look at location again.
As a matter of fact, in the very first meeting we had, and the only meeting we've had, 3 new locations were mentioned that were never considered last year. And some of the locations that were considered last year were taken off the table in a very summary manner, not through thoughtful criteria, you know, not through operational or budgetary criteria. So I can easily give you the outline of the types of work that the committee would perform. And I certainly don't intend that it would be like a clandestine thing. You know, I mean, obviously the committee would report back to you on a regular basis. Any of our meetings would be open to attendance and input from the select board, town officials, but it should be a community group. I mean, I just don't think it's going to work without one, Val, and Mike, and Dick, and, you know, none of you sitting there, I voted for all of you, so obviously I think you belong where you are. I don't think you can do the job by yourselves from that table. Not because I don't think you're smart, not because I don't think you care, but because I don't think it will work. I don't think it will happen. So I'm asking you to try something different. If we fail, at least we failed and you didn't. You know, give it a shot.
Mike, did you start to say something?
Well, I just, on the location issue, one of the things we discussed before Mary started to speak was, you know, not specifying the location yet. And then I just heard you say you didn't think we should address that again.
No, I guess maybe I misspoke. What I was saying is that, you know, the location thing has been studied to death. I don't think we need to spend the next 6 months on location and then not move on to the other.
Okay.
I agree with you 100% on that.
You were saying don't get bogged down.
Don't get bogged down.
But what I'm saying is let's open our eyes to all possibilities and not be constrained by a particular, really smart people work best if you don't tie their hands behind their back. So don't say you can only look at this construction methodology. You may only look at this property. You may only look at this amount of value for a piece. I mean, if acquiring a piece of land for $300,000 means that you can shave $1.5 million off the cost of the rest of the project, then don't tie our hands behind our back and say we can only consider 110% of appraised value, that kind of thing. You know, just let the committee see if they can come up with ideas that will suit the needs of the department, the needs of the town. That's my idea.
Are you suggesting that a committee, you know, essentially be appointed by the Board of Selectmen, similar to the way in which it was done last year, at least the structure?
No, different from the way it was done last year.
Well, I'm not saying you would do the same thing, I'm just saying, but it would be the same
Yeah.
type of committee, the same.
Well, I don't see why, otherwise what we're gonna have is, there's a bunch of us who are really, really interested in this issue who are gonna feel locked out. And I don't think that's in the best interest of the projects either. I think that would really be not good at all.
Several observations. Appreciated your most recent comment about not like last year's committee. One of the things that occurred with last year's committee is that the makeup did not understand and agree to the end game in mind that committee was charged with. And 2 of the more outspoken opponents of the project at town meeting were actually members of that committee, who actually ended up having conflicts of interest. So the legitimacy of their participation on the committee certainly was brought into question. And one of the things that we were trying to be mindful of when we set the past committee up was to be very clear as to what the purpose and expectations and deliverables were of that committee, and to try to get a clear cross-functional representation of various stakeholders from around the town. And I think it would be necessary for us to have from you, just as Val's already spoken to, not only the names of the individuals, but any of those individuals that bring qualifications to the discussion. I think it's important that we have that. I also think that there needs to be some continuity, because there was a great deal of good that was accomplished in the past year. We tend to be setting that aside. We shouldn't.
I'm not.
And I think we ought to build on that. And one of the things that was good is that you did have representation from the select board on that committee, so that you actually had a representative of the board in the room with all of the dialogues that were taking place. So I don't know that that aspect of it should change. My suggestion would be that you actually have an interested select board person actually be part of that group should we decide to move forward with it. And that does a lot of things. Certainly, it's very evident that facilitates two-way communications, especially if you have an individual who's coming to the table with an open mind that we want to do what's in the best interest of the town, and just try to define what that actually looks like and how we go about it. I am mindful that I think that the select board has a responsibility to move forward, and if we can use the language that we've talked about here tonight, I hate to see us do so many things sequentially. As you will recall, that's one of the things that got us into difficulty with the last year's committee. We did so many things sequentially, we didn't run a lot of things in parallel. My suggestion would be that we move forward with the presentation out on the street of the request for qualification / proposal. We can certainly have that continuing dialogue if we set a committee up before we act on that, so that we're not waiting for A to occur before we do B.
And I don't think that the
Can
RFP
you repeat that for me, Ray? Are you saying you want to let it out on the street that you're going to do RFP, RFQ?
That we put it out there and get the proposals in, because you got to allow 30 to 60 days.
I think you're putting the cart in front of the horse, if I may say so.
I have a different view. You need professional expertise to address whatever road the town decides it wants to go down. We want to define what that professional expertise is going to be and who's going to be part of our committee. If I reflect back on the work that went on last year's committee, we didn't bring our architect engineer in to work with us until the midnight hour.
We didn't know that we had one until the midnight hour. Let's not get into last year versus this year.
We have to learn.
Moving
We
forward.
have to do that. It's important to learn from the good and to take the bad and act on it. We need to have that engineer architect be part of us, because they're going to bring professional expertise to the examinations that we want to undertake. You need them to be there. They don't have to come in with a clear design in mind of whether it looks like 1-story, 2-story, go here or there. But you want them there with their qualifications, because we don't all have the expertise to answer those questions, just like we rely on the police chief and the fire chief to help us with certain aspects of running the departments.
And I don't think that the RFP, RFQ has to tie anyone submitting on it to a particular, whether construction management, design, build. It doesn't have to restrict that.
I mean, if the community has, what I heard you say a little bit earlier, Ray, is that last year's committee had 2 individuals who had conflict of interest, which in fact they didn't have, because the things, they never would have bid. I mean, the architect who served with us, by his own admission, said his firm doesn't do fire stations. So why can't architects and builders within our own community work as part of a community-based organization to get us to the point where we know precisely what we are proposing to an architect?
I need to correct you on 2 points that you may not be aware of. That same individual, that engineer architect, later on clearly indicated he was not protecting himself the way he should be. Clearly indicated his firm may want to consider putting a proposal in. And the other person who spoke about whether you do a design, build, or whatever, clearly has always been an outspoken candidate for the other type of construction proposal. His organization works very well in that arena. So there was hidden agendas that were not evident until the very end, to a number of us. We tried to be very open-ended, be very open-minded, but in my mind, again, my personal view, we had two individuals that had hidden agendas. And I don't want us to have that again, so I think that's important to understand who the individuals are that are on the committee. That's the only message here.
And I also do think that a committee can work, I mean, that was part of the mission last year, it was to make liaison with the architects and engineers. I don't think that there has to be a clear concept of, you know, of what we need in order to request qualifications.
Mary, what's your objection to putting the request out early?
Well, first of all, I haven't read it, but what I thought I just read, and you can correct me because I may be wrong, I thought that it was request for qualifications for an architect and construction management. I thought I heard those words.
Services related to the design and construction administration.
Well, I think Mary's right, that there's a reference somewhere in here, maybe on the second page in the expectations. Is that what it is? Through construction administration, it says in the third line. And that, again, might be a place where we'd want, this is really last year's.
Right.
And I'm just.
And it's.
Right, and I mean, I was on that committee, I was in that committee, I never saw that. I mean, I want a different way of doing it. That's all I want. I don't.
Well, may I, Mary, I got the impression that you were objecting to putting the request out because it was going to somehow funnel us into either a particular location or a particular type of construction administration as opposed to the design build, for example.
Yeah, I guess I also feel a little bit like I came here and introduced you to 20 people who have been waiting for a month to hold another meeting. I mean, we haven't met again because we want to know how we can fit with you, and I just feel like, can you set this aside? I mean, I'm learning more tonight about what you're thinking about. I mean, this is part of the process. When a community works with an elected body, there needs to be dialogue that goes back and forth. And so here we are, we're having some dialogue, and perhaps we need to do that again. But I don't see why this can't be set aside for 2 weeks so that our group can meet again. I won't be too surprised if 40 people show up at the next meeting. I don't see why we can't let this grow a little bit into something that is more organic and has a greater base to it. If you...
Just for clarification, it's the next sentence, Mike, that needs to be struck.
Could I see it?
It is anticipated that the project's construction delivery method will be construction management.
I think what I was getting at, Mary, is if if we weren't locking it into a particular type of construction management, would you be?
Yeah, I mean, I would be. I just don't want to feel disregarded. Or if I am being disregarded, then I'd like to be told I'm being disregarded. And I will take my intellect and my energies elsewhere and use them happily in a pursuit that can work.
You're not being disregarded, and I think what I'm trying, I think we're probably in violent agreement. I think what we're thinking is selecting the architect and engineering firm early so that the committee has somebody to talk to who's actually the expert, that they can communicate, this is what we think is necessary, this is how we think this needs to be done, and let them respond to you instead of having discussions among yourselves and then, getting it to them after the fact. It would much better have them involved in the conversations.
Especially on the early stages.
Yeah.
Just I mean, I hear your point about sort of holding off on this, but I'm also very much aware of the fact that we do want to keep this process moving.
I get it.
I mean, I guess, maybe a middle ground would be to, and I'd be happy to work on this RFP, RFQ. I mean, maybe some of the language that needs to be inserted in this is along the lines of, one of the things that the respondents should bring back to the table is comments, thoughts, recommendations on the best type of construction delivery methods.
Exactly.
And I
I
think
just
it
wanted
could be
to
sort
be
of
a
a
more
pro or
open-
con kind of a thing that they could put out there.
So in other words, don't move forward this precisely, but, so that, I'd be really satisfied if you would set this aside, work on it a little further. I would feel like I could contact the people who were nice enough to come the first time I invited them to come again. You're all invited as well. You're all members of this community. A broad-based community approach excludes no one, and I mean no one. Everybody's welcome. I do think for it to work, there does need to be a core group of committee members who can report back regularly on the progress of the various, so for instance, if there are 6 or 7 people working on operational needs of the 2 departments and really quantifying those and getting those into, I mean, we had a fairly good working understanding of them last year, but we didn't have anything we could hit the streets with. This year, I want to make sure we have things we can hit the streets with, if we have a good proposal.
Is it time for a motion, maybe? Or-
Actually, I don't,
Or not?
Well,
can we
guys
meet
make it?
together, do we don't even.
If you're not gonna go forward with anything, there isn't.
What's that?
If we're not
If
going
you're
to,
just gonna table it for now.
on this, I mean, if we're going to work
Can you
on,
make a motion to
Well, it
have me
was
submit 20
actually-
names?
Well, it was gonna be to take Dick up on his offer to make this RFP, RFQ a little more generic, I guess,
it doesn't require a vote.
before.
No.
It doesn't, he can do that, we can say, yes, Dick,
And
please
Dick, if you
do
wanna
that.
contact John Radigan, he's the one that wrote that.
Okay, so John has this in a Word document that I could get and, yeah, no, I'd be happy to take a crack at this.
I also have it electronically. probably.
Okay. I mean, I guess I was just going to make the point that maybe I misunderstood the offer or the comments you made a couple of meetings ago. I was under the impression that your group was going to sort of keep meeting and keep working and keep talking about the issues, that you weren't necessarily waiting for some actions by this board.
Oh, definitely. I was looking for feedback. I remember I said, I'm wondering how we get invited to the party.
You just have to come to the party, I think, which
Well,
you
I'm
did
here.
tonight.
Yeah, I'm here, but, I think it would be more fruitful for me to organize meetings of highly intelligent, committed, creative thinkers to actually work on the problem than to show up en masse here.
I agree.
So,
And I agree with that. I want you to hear me say this. We have had the discussions about what we believe was one of the significant shortcomings in what went in front of the town for consideration last year, and one of those was the recognition that we didn't engage other key stakeholders to talk about the value that improving the quality of our facilities brings to every resident in this town. And that we identified a number of key groups. And we also talked about trying to make sure that we engage some professional expertise to help us in telling this story, this compelling story, far better than we did last time, in a way that's helpful to that. And of course, a good piece of that is looking at a broad brush of the key stakeholders in this group. That's why I think it's important to understand what the qualifications are. And I think it's important for you to convey, just because 20 names get turned in. I think we're very fortunate that we just celebrated about a week ago a very great success with the dedication of the library. And if you look up on their dedication, either on their website or also in their handouts, they had very strong groups of people that were advising them as to what moved forward, and they had clear expectations. But if you look at the makeup of any of those groups, most of the time they were under 10, and most of the time you find your 7 or 8 or 9 people that are in there. So when I hear 20, I get a little concerned, Mary, because don't create the expectation. If 20 names get turned in, and there's going to be a committee of 20 people.
No, I said I'd like to give you, let me repeat what I said. I'd like to give you a list of 20 names and ask you to choose from among them 10 people to form a committee to move forward to craft a proposal or proposals that can be taken to the voters in March to meet the significant infrastructure needs of these departments. I don't expect there to be 20. In fact, I think the library really came down to a core of about 6 people, and then the 6 got joined by 4. I mean, that's...
Right.
They brought outside
That's how it
expertise
works.
in to help
Right.
as they needed.
So if you're agreeable to my idea, I'm agreeable to your idea. You can work on this.
Yeah, I mean, I can get
Do
something.
you want me to actually read it and tell you the parts that distress me? Or
Yeah,
the
if you
parts
wanna-
that I like? Is that
yeah,
all right?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
That'd be good.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
no.
you.
I mean, if Paul, if you can send me an electronic version of this, I can get something to the full board for the
Thanks.
next meeting.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Mary. Get us the names. All right.
Do I bring those names to you at your next regularly scheduled meeting? Is that a good idea, or at your,
You can email them to me, Mary.
just email them to you anytime? Okay, great.
And also, if you could, also kind of a general outline of the tasks that you
Well, the things we've
believe are
talked
the...
about so far, I mean, as the group moves on, I'm
Yep.
sure we'll come up with
It'll
more
evolve.
tasks. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Okay. Next item on the agenda, union contract approved by the Select Board for 1 year. We did, as was mentioned by Ray earlier, approve a 1-year extension with some modifications to the contract that has been in effect for the past year. And I don't think there's any further need to speak about that. Finally, Kathy Bentwood, discussion of the Veterans Home. Would you like to come forward, please? Yes, please. Pull up chairs, that's
Hi.
good.
Oh, nice, thank you. Oh my God, yeah. Come on, Jack.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you. My presentation.
You're on.
You're on.
This actually was started because of Paul. A couple of years ago, he was taking care of homeless veterans down by the river. And he said to me, we really don't have a good way to address caring for homeless veterans. And certainly our current shelter doesn't do that. And actually, we wouldn't, with respect to veterans, we wouldn't even call a place that would serve veterans a shelter. It would be a farmer cooperative or whatever. So Paul's comment sort of dovetailed with conferences that I was attending at the state level on the issue of New Hampshire serving homeless veterans. Also, it dovetailed with a study the Bridge House had done by PSU graduate department on the benefit of our being a single gender only shelter, just serving women and children. And so the numbers are 450 to 650 homeless veterans in New Hampshire with about 110 dedicated beds. Most of the veterans are suffer from PTSD, something that we didn't even identify after World War II or Korea. And now, with recent veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan, they're being told on reentry that you're all going to suffer some element of PTSD. So the recommendation through the VA in Manchester and White River Junction is that if you can provide a rural setting, and we're looking at sort of a very small farm, vegetables, chickens, it's a better place for folks who are suffering from PTSD. They really have a much harder time in congested, crowded areas. And then I don't know where I found out about this piece of land at the top of Plymouth alongside Quincy Road. But, speak loud, okay. But, God, I feel like I'm running for something here.
Just gonna speak up a little bit more.
All right. But it seemed like if the town was willing to serve veterans by letting this group, who wants to also serve veterans, have 5 acres of apparently what I understand is a 75-acre difficult-to-use parcel, then that would serve our needs and maybe make the town also feel as though they had contributed something in the service of veterans. So I'm asking if you would consider 5 of the 75 acres that we could convert to a small place to serve veterans. Donna is a grant writer for the Cdbg. I think she's well known in Plymouth. She wrote the grant for Whole Village and for the Bridge House and others. And John has been working very recently with a very challenging 69-year-old Vietnam-era vet at the shelter. And Jeff represents the Bridge House. So.
Oh, could you identify the parcel? I'm not completely familiar with.
It's across from the airport. Looks like sort of a string bean.
North of the airport, Dick, right across the street from the airport, we own 70 acres. It's appraised at about $128,000.
How
much of that is wetlands?
There is a portion of it that's wetlands.
What's that?
In acreage, I couldn't tell you, but there's definitely a portion of it that's wetlands.
How much frontage on the road, do you know? Any idea? Shape?
I'm gonna guess it could be up to 2,000 feet in frontage.
And
The length of our runway is let's say, about 1,500 feet is the runway. We definitely own.
is it flat?
No,
Well, across the street.
it's mostly bog.
Yeah.
There's a couple of obvious raised areas that look usable, but strikes me that most of
it. Consider it flat.
Oh, really?
It's flat but wet. Some of it's wet.
Some of it's wet. Some of it's dry, some of it's definitely dry.
Is there any development on it at all? Any road access or anything like that? How did we get it? Do you know?
We've always had it. In the 50s, we did attempt a north-south runway.
Oh,
The
I see.
Galen winds in Plymouth are out of the west. So the north-south runway basically got as far as clearing the trees and died early in during the 60s. As 95% of the time when you're landing a plane or taking off at the Plymouth airport, you're going into the west or arriving facing.
So do you think it was originally acquired to become part of the airport, but that's not a likely use of it anymore? Doesn't appear to be.
We've almost closed the airport down several times since I've been here, so it's never expanded itself across the street.
And would this be, is it okay if
Yeah, go ahead.
a separate nonprofit entity of some kind? Is that?
It would be a nonprofit entity.
And you would write a grant, I suppose, for initial construction and that sort of thing? What's the anticipation there? Do you have an idea how that would work?
Well, Cdbg, which you've had before, goes through the town, had a couple projects, also gone through the county. But that's a community development block grant, that's HUD funds, that's only up to 500,000. A building of that size would be a larger budget, probably close to $1 million, and it would need matching funds to score well enough to get funded.
I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
It would need a matching funds, they'd need to raise another 500,000 likely to finance the building and score enough to get funded.
And would it, so that would be privately raised, you think, the additional $500,000 or so? And then how would it sustain itself? Do we know?
right now, what the person that I'm engaged in conversation with is Leslie Lightfoot. Leslie runs the Veterans Victory Farm in Fitzwilliam, New Hampshire. She has 5 other homeless veterans programs that have been in effect for 20 years in Massachusetts, and just recently opened one in Puerto Rico because Vieques has a lot of American soldiers. And she sort of has the gold standard. When I talk to the VAs, they have sent me to talk with her. And it seems to me that she runs a great program. It's got a pretty minimal staff, because she says, you guys are over 50. If you can't figure out how to make this work, we're not going to be babysitting for you. And a lot of vets don't want that. They just want a safe place, a warm place. And I think they're just trying to get their dignity back somehow.
I think I missed the size of the facility that you're contemplating.
Well, I'm looking at serving at least 10 veterans, but probably no more than 20. So the initial construction might take into consideration 10 very small, bedrooms. Maybe every 4 bedrooms would share a bathroom, and then the second floor would have the same configuration. Maybe thinking that we might serve 16, but you want to build in the beginning for your maximum. You don't want to go after that down the road, I'm assuming.
And if the town were to contribute the property, could that be considered part of the matching funds? It could.
Yes. I just don't know what 5 acres would be.
Right.
Have there been, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Have there been any discussions with representatives that, I don't know if it's the right word or not, I'm thinking of Fred when I asked this question, but that people who essentially manage the airport now, just to make sure that there's no disagreements?
Number one, the legislative body will have to weigh in on this. So if you're not going to wait till the March meeting, it would call for a special meeting. Number two, there has to be an assessment study done, because it is airport property.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we hear from Fred.
No, honestly, and we need to be careful about this. We consider the property across from the airport completely different parcel of property. And we'll be dealing with something in non-public tonight. You need to keep that very specific. We don't identify it as airport south and airport north. It just happens to be another 70 acres that the town owns across the street.
It just seems to me that we're talking about something in terms of property that's adjacent to the airport, that there's got to be an interest there, or if there's not an interest or a conflict or anything, support for this type of effort. But it just that's a, if you will, in a butter. So this seems like the earlier there's conversations with them, the better off we are to find out we either have an issue or we don't have an issue.
I guess my question was on the type of housing. Is this transitional, or, I mean, would your client base be there for 6 months, 6 years?
It can be transitional. I'm a big believer in telling a story, so just each one of you gets one of those. So for the veteran, in the lower right-hand corner, okay, he was in the National Guard in the 70s. In the 70s, you didn't have to finish high school to get in the National Guard. He did weekend service, but they didn't consider that as rising to the level of being one of the veterans. So he has nothing at all. There's no support for him. Somebody like that would be included. But we advocate well, so he would have been transitional because he just got his high school diploma and he can work now. And so, we're always working with people. And now the guy up there in the upper left-hand corner is going to be 70. He's waiting for a bed to open up at the domiciliary in Bennington, Vermont, which is where he was born. He was in the Marines. He was 24 months in Vietnam. Been homeless for a long time. But now he's had some sort of mental changes, he doesn't even remember he used to drink and smoke. He just sort of sits quietly in a chair and looks out a window, and with help with medications and some food, he would be fine in what we might call assisted living until he's 75, and then maybe something will open up at the domiciliary, and then he would move into a veterans nursing home. So there's sort of a broad spectrum. I think the younger veterans might absorb more funding, and we're looking at how to probably serve people with that budget in mind, that limited budget. So it probably would be towards the older veterans. Transitional funds are available. You can, if a person goes through the VA, you can then apply for grant per diem funding, and that's $35 a day, which is going to help sustain the operation. So let's say you had 16 veterans who went through the VA. They had anything other than a dishonorable discharge, and we can apply for those funds. Then maybe you get 4 others. One might be like the fellow that you see in the lower right-hand corner. He's not recognized because they just don't do that, you know, for old National Guard. Now the National Guard's in Iraq. Things have changed, but not for him. So he might be that other component. And I think we have to pull in the people who have resources to sustain the few that may not. Does that make sense? Okay. In my optimism, I figured that a lot of the pilots across the street probably were in the military at one time, and they'd be more than happy to give an old vet a ride in a plane.
Is there a similar type of facility to this elsewhere in New Hampshire?
If you visit, you want to come with me to see Leslie Lightfoot at the Veterans Victory Farm in Fitzwilliams.
At the what?
Veterans Victory Farm in Fitzwilliams.
Yeah.
It is similar. I think my thought about this facility here was sort of like the roundabout. If we put in solar, if we put in geothermal, if we do everything we could possibly be doing to minimize fuel costs, minimize the carbon, you know, imprint, then it could be actually a model for how to build something well in these times of sort of high fuel costs. I would bring New Hampshire Cooperative Extension on board, and they could handle the little garden piece, maybe the chickens. Omer Ahern wants us to have cattle. I don't think that's going to happen, but I love the idea of bringing people into this environment where there are chores, but they have to do with just, you know, we're not going to make them search data on a keyboard that they can't use. You can go out and you can collect the eggs and you can feed the chickens, and you can feel good about being productive.
Paul, did you?
Air photo. These are the 2 properties in question. This is our airport. I'll go down the dick. This is the parcel that we're talking about. So our land starts right about here. And when you get to the back of the property, it's wet there. It doesn't show on the map here. It's wet there. But you can see right across from where the office is. Yeah.
So this is the parcel we're talking about?
Nope, that's not ours.
No.
Up
Nope.
this way,
Probably right, that's probably the property line, Mike.
the tree
Oh,
line.
at the tree line. And then it goes that way.
Goes this is our property,
Yeah, it's going this way.
right, up that way,
The one on the, I looked at the one on the left.
69 acres.
60.
I'm assuming it hadn't been surveyed anytime recently, if at all.
It's a nice picture.
That's the airport.
So this really goes like that, I guess, right? There's a clearing there. Do you know why it's cleared on the?
I remember putting the Army there to camp out. We used to use it every year. It was
Really?
coming from New York with Chinooks, and we used to land Chinooks there,
Really?
and they would use that as a campground site to set up their tents and use our airport.
So it has some military history already, I guess, huh?
Airport always has that. We're in the Yankee fly zone.
Help me to understand, what's the I don't know if I use the word expectation or the next step that's anticipated coming out of our discussions this evening. What are we looking to have accomplished?
Well, I think it is whether the select board supports it and wants to go forward with the action required to get us to a special town meeting, because that's what's necessary, is a special meeting of the legislative body unless we were to want to.
Donna, if there's any,
If
is
you're
there any
willing to
timeline
consider.
and sunsets, Donna, that we're gonna miss?
Yeah, I think there's two issues. There's the land issue, if you're willing to consider the land, and the other issue, are you willing to back the CDBG application? CDBG can only go through municipality,
Mhm.
so it requires public hearings and stuff. We'd have to set those up, but in July, the end of July would be a good time to put the application in. It's the next deadline. The next one after that's January. We had 16% cut this year. I'm sure we're gonna get cuts next year. You know, the sooner we get a hold of this money, the better, because there may not be money in a few years.
May I ask a question? Don't we need some kind of an emergency to hold a special town meeting? Can you do it?
It's a special meeting, we just have to, there's restraints and I'll send them out on what the qualifications are. You can call, when something unusual comes up during the course of the year, it's going to get back to the word incidental.
We had one last year when there was an unanticipated time constraint, and
Yeah, we had to buy the new ladder truck,
yeah.
so we did it for that.
It's relevant on what your definition of emergency is.
Yeah. Okay.
I'd like to suggest that if you were living under a bridge, you might consider it an emergency.
Well, yeah, I understand that, but I was just thinking, if this, I didn't know if this was the kind of thing for which the statute would permit us, but I've never really looked at it, so I don't know. But yeah, I appreciate the thought. I mean, one emergency might be, or one the obvious constraint is the money, I guess, and the deadline for applying and that sort of thing.
I have a question.
Yes.
Could leasing be a possibility
Leasing would be great,
instead of,
whatever works.
instead of giving up? Like
Right.
we lease the municipal, the airport had its
Right.
leased. We have plans on leasing another airport.
Have to be a long-term lease, though, not like a year.
No,
And that would take away the matching,
No, there's still value in
Yeah.
5 acres
Right.
of land.
The
lease.
Bridge House, in fact, leases the land from the whole village.
Mhm.
And that's how that was set up. And then there was a value attributed to that parcel that was applied towards a match. And so they recognized that, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes.
Does that change, in some way, the authority we need from the town?
Paul?
Or why did you ask that?
Does that change the authority we need from the legislative body, or is that still a requirement?
No, I think it's just, if the legislative body did not want to give up the land for some reason, then just putting another option on the table. Because I'm afraid that 5 acres isn't going to equate to that much of a match.
Mm-hmm.
I see.
The whole piece of property is assessed at $128,000.
That's not going to be a substantial amount, but the building's gonna cost enough that some more money's gonna have to be raised anyway.
So the structure itself will be able to be used as a match.
Right.
I, for one, would like to see us continue to move forward. I think this is a very worthwhile undertaking, and I think it would be an asset to have it within the town of Plymouth. And I think we just continue to move forward to find out if there's any showstoppers that
And
might show up.
figure out what's the best way to go about it.
Yes, ma'am.
And a special meeting could be the showstopper,
Yeah.
if it doesn't meet the qualifications.
How much time do you need, lead time to have a special meeting? If she has a deadline, the end of July.
Don't you have to go to the Superior Court for
That's what he's
a
looking at
permission
now.
for a special meeting?
No.
No?
Can we read from this? The Secretary book?
Yep.
Special town meetings with no appropriation requested permits the selectmen to call a special meeting anytime they find an occasion for one. Honestly, 31. Empowering the selectmen to insert any article that authorizes a petition of voters, so there might be a petition required.
And what is the lead time that we need in order to set up a special meeting?
All special town meetings require the same posting as annual meetings, plus publication of the warrant in the newspaper for 1 week after posting. So we're probably talking 3 or 4 weeks.
So it sounds like it's not a big deal unless there's money involved, really, or an appropriation. Is that? I was just thinking maybe that's where I got that idea that it, it's some sort of emergency.
I do think we need to seek counsel tomorrow and get some answers as soon as possible.
And if we could, at the same time that that's being looked into, set up a public hearing, a potential public hearing date for the CDBG public hearings. Those are the 3 consecutive public hearings we have to do for a CDBG application.
Mm-hmm.
For end of June, middle of July, around then. Whatever suits you.
I think so.
You might want to read everything all over. This is
I mean, I guess, I mean, I think this is a great idea. I'll make the observation that I find it hard to believe that there wouldn't be some appropriation tied into the special town meeting for something. I mean, unless, I guess a key question would be, where would that match come from? And there's gonna be some match provided by the town through the donation of the property, or a portion of the larger piece. But then there's gonna be, funds associated with the construction of the building, or, engineering, or, sort of a broad gamut of sort of operational needs.
But that's not money that the town is looking to appropriate. We're not trying to.
Well, I guess that gets to the question of, in the CDBG grant, you're gonna have to identify where those matching funds are coming from. That doesn't give you all a lot of time to pull together a fairly sizable donation fundraising campaign.
That's what I meant earlier, on whether the special meeting would be able to take place, because Dick's absolutely right. If we have to tie any dollar amounts,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we'll be able to call it. Then it has to fall underneath the emergency meeting.
Generally, what we've done in the past with the other buildings, I believe, or what we often do, is we get a line of credit from a bank to go in as our match with the intent of fundraising to get grants, to offset that, to never use that line, but to actually have a backup position when we apply for funds. That, because the CDBG process takes so long, by the time that application goes in, we have quite a bit of time to raise the other funds before we ever hit, a shovel to the ground. So it buys us quite a bit of time.
Tax credits could be part of this and things like that.
So I think, we should seek council's opinion. Is any generally agreement that
Yeah,
this is
I think
something
that
that
probably
we
take a look
go
at it,
forward?
absolutely.
Yep. Excuse me.
And,
Great, thank you.
yeah,
That's what we're asking for, yeah.
That'd be perfect.
we definitely, as Ray said, I think it's a great idea. I think it's, the land is there, it's not being used, and I think it's an important thing.
Thank you.
Great,
All right.
thank you.
If anybody would like to join me to see Leslie Lightfoot at the Victory Farm in Fitzwilliam, let me know.
When is that?
That'd be great. It will be probably the beginning of June, and the local Friends of Veterans, Bruce Verlay, will be joining me. John and I have already gone. He'll come back for that, and I think Donna's coming down.
So it's a trip down there?
And she's going to help us craft the budget, and we're really looking at a very workable, low budget for this.
Good. Can you send emails?
Hmm?
Send me an email about
Yeah.
one, and I'll share it with everybody.
Sure, that's great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Huh?
All right. We have no unfinished business. Is there any additional public comment? Yes.
With respect to the airport, use of the airport for non-aviation activities. First snake in the grass you'll have out there on the north side of Quincy Road, that's 75 acres, your environmental mitigation plan. There's been a diversion of wetlands out there, unbeknownst to a lot of people, and that would be the first element you'll have to mitigate at our cost. Second, the utilization of that facility would, as a non-aviation event, would eventually, it would immediately reduce the value, the commercial value of the airport with respect to aviation-related activities that could be on that north side. And that is where your capital improvement systems go. That's for your ground level attractions that are not the air side. The part of the airport that has a runway is called the air side. The north side, that's 75 acres that we develop for aviation-related activities, called the ground side. That's people come in on bicycles, walking, cars, whatever. But that's where your capital improvement monies come from, because whatever you do there in a commercial value system or business is what generates money, whether you fly or not. And strangely enough, all of the big airports, Manchester, Pease, everybody's redesigning them because they were so heavily involved financially with the air side, they forgot where the money was coming from. Because those people that land the planes, they pay their $700 or $1,000 per landing, buy 2 quarts of oil, they're gone. It's the people that come in there to buy stuff or services from aviation-related activities that happen on the airport that pay the freight of the airport, because the rest of the money comes from the FAA or your tax dollars. So we, the people of the town of Plymouth, would be supporting the operation of that airport that could never grow financially with a non-aviation activity. And by the way, that building would represent a high-density residential structure, and you'd have to put that way north on the property to get out of the safety zone of that runway. Because right now, we're right at limits as far as Part 77, but the safety zone for residential structures near an airport is an issue, besides the noise. So that's why you really do feasibility studies. And that's what I had commented the last meeting was, if we want the airport, we should do the feasibility study, which evaluates each one of these criterias, and will tell you whether or not you should proceed or not, even as an airport. It might say after the study, close it up or leave it like it is, or maybe make a different decision. But you're not allowing yourself the value of a feasibility study that would give you that information rather than pro-con appeals for use or non-use of that part of the property. I think there's a lot of technical issues that deal with the airport that aren't visible or known to people who are not properly experienced with the design, specification, and operation of an airport. And I say again, when I was the airport manager, I was looking at that north part for people who were interested in building hangars. But there were some definite environmental issues that needed to be mitigated, and obviously it's who's going to do that, and who's going to pay for that. And so I think it may look like it's nice and flat. A lot of that flat area I filled in, or I had filled in, because people do come up here to camp. When they do fly-ins, they fly up from all over this. Where our service area for this airport is 400 miles radius, so a marketing area. So people come up from all over to camp out on that north side. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't proceed. I'd like to see you proceed with the appropriate study that would give you the appropriate information to make a good decision on whether or not this is a good idea or not. And I don't have an airplane, so, but if we're gonna do airport, we need to do airport correctly, and if we're not, let's call it what it is.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
The first thing I did mention tonight, however, was that we need to do a study.
Yeah.
And in contact with the FAA, and to explain the conical safety zone, which is called conical. This is the office in hangar that we have down at the airport. This is our runway. You have an imaginary line that goes out like this, that's dictated by the FAA. So it clears our buildings, and it continues upward. So unless you're starting to talk about a high rise, that's the line all around our airport, whether it's Perkins Farm or any place that has to be within that angle in a conical zone.
And again, I did remember that one of the first things that you mentioned was the need for the study, so appreciate the input. Patrice?
I just wanted to say thank you to Ray for going and taking your time to attend the selectmen's seminars that they have. I found it very interesting, and
Thank you.
I'm very happy to see our selectmen continuing to do that kind of thing. And on the LGC issue, I was going to say, Mike, I'm glad you're on that, but I would suggest going a little farther than contacting our legislators who may be able to offset any actions taken. It's well established that they overcharge the taxpayers in the towns and cities. And I'd like to see a demand letter from our small town to the LGC asking for reimbursement of the money that the Plymouth taxpayers overpaid in several pools. So I think it's at that point, it's great to wait for the reports, but there's been numerous reports at different levels with, I believe, the AG's Office of Securities Regulation. So, and we're going back several years now, and there's a big chunk of money. The money's already been listed on the website as to how much they owe us from 2008 and just go forward. It's a lot of money. So I would appreciate our select board's efforts in pursuing this and not giving up and not waiting or being nice guys about it. They overcharged everybody. Our little town could use the help, and they should reimburse us. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrice.
Yes.
I was interested in the couch and furniture burnings. It seemed like we had a lot of them at the end of the year here. And how many did we have? And I heard that there were some college kids caught, and what was that? What were the consequences of that? But how many did we have?
26 in the month of May.
Oh my God. That's pretty scary.
26 in the month of May. There have been 4 arrests.
Good.
And those are the outcomes, more pending potentially, and all of the outcomes are unknown as of now.
It seemed like every night the last couple of weeks down near us. Yeah.
No further public comment? Thank you. And at this time, I would accept a motion to go into a non-public session in accordance with RSA 91-8:3, 2A, personnel union negotiations, B, hiring, and C, reputation.
Is this yours, Captain?
Oh, I would make that.
No, that's
I'll
Edward's.
second.
All those in favor?
Yes. Aye.
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 We are in non-public.
Well, it really helps to have this book.